My name is Adream, and I'm an associate professor of art and design in the Peck School of the Arts at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and I'm also the co-area head of design and visual communication. And my talk today is kind of about how designers integrate research into their process and how we integrate it into the classroom. Designers are typically very concrete thinkers. They're active processors. They make things. They understand the world through what they make. So research is typically more abstracted. It's more of a passive process. And so how we sort of change that to make that a regular part of our design process is what this is about. So designers use two phrases a lot. We use user-centered design and we use human-centered design. And user-centered design is essentially what it sounds like. Designers base their entire process around the end user, right? So we look at you, we understand what your problems are, and then we solve them. Designers used to be, we called it the black box. So they'd come at us with a little sheet that told us, these are all the problems that we're looking at, this is how we want you to solve it. And designers were the keepers of a skill, right? We knew how to use programs, we knew how to make something look good. And what design is becoming is we're sort of the gatekeepers to the user. Right? We position ourselves between the client and the user, and we say, this is how we find our problems, this is how we're going to define our problems, and this is what our solutions are. So user-centered design, it's an approach that concerns itself with the context of how the context of the user, concerned with how a person or a group of people interact with design artifacts in a particular context. And this is because our design problems are getting increasingly difficult, and they're increasingly complex. And I've been teaching for 16 years, and the programs that we started teaching 16 years ago don't even exist anymore. You know, the ways that I save the programs don't exist anymore. My student work I can't access anymore. So I think everything's sort of changed. And our designers are increasingly responsible for learning new technology and then the sort of global impact of the projects that they do. I can have a freshman student in a class that puts something out on Instagram that goes viral, and they come back in and they're on blogs or they've been picked up by something. And so this sort of immediacy that they're getting in their design process is important. So in order to meet the technological and the global impact, we ask that the designers are using empathy or empathetic research for success. So essentially, the problems that we're dealing with are not the same mindset that we create them in. So we call this the participatory mindset in our classrooms, so where the teacher and the student teach and learn, and they're jointly responsible. So the teacher has a responsibility to the students, but the students also have a responsibility to the teacher. And this educational growth is far more of a loop than something that's projected forward to them. So our initial thoughts, right? Will our design curriculum and our students benefit from participatory research? So the reason we use it is participatory research offers increased student and faculty responsibility in learning, and it requires prototyping and iteration. Students are making things, right? We know they enjoy making things. We know that that's an important part of their process, and we know that they learn through their hands, right? And so they have to go through, they have to make those mistakes, they have to look at them, and they have to experience them. Participatory research connects us to a diverse user population and discipline. So that asks us to go out and to meet people, meet diverse disciplines, to work with other colleges, to work with other students. We work with engineers, health science. We work with other areas in the art. We're working with education in the School of Education. So we're coming out, we're bringing in experts from other fields, and then we're also looking at different types of users. So designers, our designers at least, are working in the community. They're working for the community. They have several projects that they do their senior year where it's considered a community-based research. And then it broadens and equalizes the classroom dialogue, so that what we've actually learned, and this was kind of the best thing that we've learned out of making a participatory classroom, is that I'm no longer dictating to the students. It's become, like I said, a loop, and we're talking there. And so it's broadened, but it's also sort of democratized our talks, right? So students bring in interesting thoughts, they bring in theories, they bring in things that they want to learn, and then we do the same thing, and it makes a kind of exciting classroom. So participatory research, it asks open-ended questions, and it focuses on problem definition and not solving, and that's kind of what I alluded to at the first part. So design has moved from the black box where we come in, we have a set of skills, and we produce what we've been asked to produce, to now we're being asked to define the problem. So what actually are we looking at? Is this a problem of the shape of a teapot, or is it a problem where we're looking at how we heat the water itself, right? So designers are changing that sort of thought process. Participatory research is generative and flexible, meaning they go through multiple iterations. Our students have to be flexible. Things change constantly, like halfway through a class, we might have a change in technology. We might have a changing specification from a client, so they have to be open and they have to be flexible to change. It's social and immersive. This is where a lot of us are really interested in making these classes so that they're working with people in industry, that we're pulling them outside of the class itself, that we're open to bringing in experts from other fields. It's serendipitous, right? We're always looking for what makes something work. Sometimes it just happens. Some of my best classes have been the result of serendipity. And then last is it's integrative and it's participatory. So we're using real-life problems to connect the user with designers to facilitate learning and provide future practical problem-solving knowledge. And so how we implement this is the first, and this is where you'll have pictures, so it'll get a little exciting. We're implementing participatory research through collaborative workspaces. And what that's required is we've done a lot of sort of grant seeking in order to make spaces that work for everybody, that work for our students, that work for our faculty, that work for the public. Most of our lectures are now public knowledge, so public can come in, they can participate in the lecture itself or in the critiques. It has to be something that we can use the design thinking methodology. We use participatory research to build empathy, to create positive change, right? That's always sort of one of our goals in design is how do we positively impact our students and how do we positively impact our community and the greater world beyond. And then it has to be something that allows us to evaluate and evolve our process. So the new classroom, we went from discipline-centric to something that's interconnected. We went from trend-dependent to something that's emergent. We went from independent to participatory, which is the point of this. And then we went from product to solution to something future-forward. Our students have to be comfortable at this point that we don't necessarily know what's coming. I read something about the changeover from designers making a product to creating a beta test, right? So we're very comfortable just doing beta test, beta test, beta test. So our classrooms itself, they're multi-purpose spaces in and outside of the campus, and we do move them all over. They have access to all the tools that they need. We give them real-world spaces outside of the classroom, and then they're continually evolving. At this point, we've generated close to $250,000 through grants to kind of create these spaces that our students can use and that the community can use as well. So I'm just going to kind of flip through these. These are some of the spaces that we're using. This is a shared space. It's called the something Center for Entrepreneurialism and Design. And so the university is sort of, what they're working on is something called the business model canvas. So we're teaching our designers about entrepreneurialism. They go out into entrepreneurialism in two ways. One is they're asked to interact with other entrepreneurs and start to learn the process. And then one is they come up with a product or a solution and they become the entrepreneur themselves. So that's the business model canvas. And they're working with business students, the head of the graduate schools over there. So you're seeing they're kind of coming in, they're talking, and they're building it out. And again, you'll see it's a public forum. Our classrooms are all broad spaces where we come in, we write on these, they stay up all the time. Sometimes they're fun, sometimes they're not, but we're really using that space. It's kind of a war room mentality. So at the bottom, what you're seeing is an actual classroom. All of the tables come together. All of the walls have homosode on it. So we're constantly pinning. Students are required to have a billion little Post-it notes. So we're constantly posting things on the walls. We are constantly giving presentations again. So this is just one student talking about the different personas for his entrepreneurial class. We also work with the community. So this is actually a student working with an existing entrepreneur to talk about an interface that he's building and kind of help him walk through that and what the steps he would go through. This is more of a community good. These are our students. They're working with MPS, so students in the community that don't have access a lot to art classes, definitely not access to design classes. And they come in 3 nights a week, and our students stay after school, and they work with them, and they teach them about design as sort of mentors. This is something that's called the Island of Brilliance, and if you've never heard of it, you should look it up. Islands of Brilliance, it started from Mark Fairbanks, whose son has autism, and he's one of my design students now. He's made it through college. And the entire program is they take designers that are in industry, our students come in, and we set up a one-on-one peer-related mentorship. And it goes for anywhere from 6 weeks, and we've had students in it for 3 or 4 years. And the work that comes out of these students is amazing, from the first class to the last. And what they've found in the success of it is that these kids that are coming into it are excited to learn. They're coming to class, they're waiting for the doors to open, and our students are part of that process. They're a huge part of it. They love it. They do it out of the kindness of their heart, and they really enjoy it. So that is Kevan, and he's working with a little girl with autism. Milwaukee, this is actually Milwaukee's flag right there. It was put on a TED Talk as the worst flag in America. So actually this is one of my students over here, Steve Kotis, and he was part of that TED Talk, and he talked about redesigning Milwaukee's flag, and we called it the People's Flag. And so there was a giant competition citywide where our students participated. We had, again, industry participating. You didn't have to be a designer, and we all put in for this, sort of new flag ideal. And this is the public workshops where people were talking about that. This is, again, public spaces. Here's the tools, right? We give them everything that we can. We give them the spaces that they can use. We give them the materials they can use. But we also try to give them technology. And what you're actually seeing is we have 3D spaces where they can 3D print, laser cut. There's CNC routers. There's traditional jewelry and metalsmithing tools. There's tool and die stuff. And we have different experts that come in, take care of some of that. But in general, we're asking our students to start to sort of build this stuff. This was probably our most famous thing, is we were one of the first schools that partnered with the Enable group, where we were building 3D printed hands for kids that were suffering from amniotic band syndrome or for some reason had lost part of their hands. And so the point of this, though, is we invited the community in. They're actually in our space. So this is Karuna and his mother. And they're talking about the different hands, how they fit. We made the children part of the process. When we could, we made the children's school classrooms part of the process. We invited them in so they would learn. So we had an entire school's 3rd grade show up at our lab, and the students worked with them. So again, that's Karuna. This is actually a little girl, Bella. She was our youngest at that point, so she was 4. And then this is one of the students in there. Again, you can barely see it, but there's like a black hand. So they're trying different things. So we use a design thinking model for research. And design thinking is not anything necessarily new. It's been something around for years that creatives have been applying the principle of design thinking without putting a name to it. Charles and Ray Ames advocated for learning through doing. That's a design thinking process. And the way they did it was they explored a range of user needs and constraints before designing their Ames chairs that we still love 70 years later. David Kelly and Tim Brown are part of IDEO. They're IDEO designers who coined the phrase design thinking. And so that's where it really came into fruition, and we started to use that as a terminology on a regular basis in our classrooms. And they use that to encapsulate the methods that we had just been talking about that designers have been using for years. And design thinking ideology asserts hands-on, user-centric approach to problem solving. And there's 6 distinct phases. So these are the models. This is actually from this whole time it's been there. Nobody said anything. No, I don't know. All right. The Design Thinking 101. This is the Nielsen Norman group. Sorry. So Don Norman is a kind of designer / design thinker. And so this is the process. So I can show it a different way. We have understand, explore, and materialize. And that starts with empathize, define, ideate, prototype, test, and implement. And test and implement are the things that we most rarely get to in the classroom. We usually get to this point of prototyping, and where participatory comes in is it allows us to bring those same users back in and to test it with them. So quickly, empathizing is conducting research in order to develop knowledge about what users do, say, think, and feel. Defining it is combining the research, and this is where designers have changed. Designers, this is their meat right now. They design all of their research where they combine all of the research and observe where the user's problems exist and highlight opportunities for innovation. Ideation is brainstorming, what we think of as brainstorming, and again, that's a democratized process for designers. We have a war room, we open it up, people are putting their ideas up there. We use the no wrong idea, but then we come in and we start clumping them together. We find commonalities in our problems. Prototyping is building real tactile representations. Testing is returning to the user to ask feedback, and we ask, does this solution meet our needs, right? Because we consider ourselves users now. It's that participatory process. And has it improved the way we feel, think, or do our tasks? And then last is implementation and putting that vision into effect. So first-person observation. This is actually Bill Moggridge. He was another IDEO. You can see like a theme there. IDEO is really important to designers. So if there's a simple, easy principle that binds everything I've done together, it's my interest in people and their relationship to things. I think designers are really good people watchers. If you're not a good people watcher, you're probably not going to enjoy design. If you don't enjoy watching people to see why they behave a certain way, what they're doing about something, then you're not going to enjoy being a designer. And in design, we focus on active research models rather than passive research models. And we actually use the Scandinavian method, and the Scandinavian method is actually, it emphasizes democracy. It came about in the 1970s, right? And it came with the Norwegian Iron and Metal Workers Union, and they emphasize a collective resource approach to develop strategies and techniques for workers to influence the design and the use of their computer applications at the workplace. So it's a commitment to democracy and democratization of the classroom. It's a discussion of values in design and our imagined future, and it's how conflict and contradictions are regarded as a resource in design. And that's why we actually sort of focus on this Scandinavian method. It's because conflict is an important part of our class. Problems are an important part of our class. They're a learning opportunity. And then this idea of value in design, and this has become a bad word in the classroom, right? I think that at least in our school right now, teachers are a little bit under attack because saying anything about value runs the risk of talking about competing values, but we try to bring that idea of, you know, what sort of values are brought into this process? Is it something worthwhile? Jane Fulton Surrey, again, IDEO, she calls herself a global nomad of human factors, and she finds opportunities for design to improve the ways in which the experience can inform design, and this is where you're going to start to see observers. So she calls them the thoughtless acts or the random acts of design, which are reacting, responding, co-opting, exploiting, adapting, and conforming. And so this is reacting. So we interact automatically with spaces and objects we encounter. How do our surroundings, giving their physical properties, shape how we interact with them? Responding. Are there some features in the world around us that trigger a certain behavior? Co-opting. In what way do we make use of opportunities in our surroundings when we need to fulfill a need? One thing that technology has allowed us to do is all our students have cell phones. There's no excuse for them not to go out in the world and start capturing these as examples, and they do. So this is really similar to reacting, but it's more purposeful. How do we take advantage of a particular property or object and its surroundings? Adapting. How and with what purpose do we create our own context of interaction? Conforming. How do we notice behaviors shared amongst groups of people, maybe indicative of a certain cultural context? I always thought this one on the right was really funny, like one person stands on something and then the next thing you know, everyone's standing on it. One person puts their piece of gum on a tree and the next thing it's covered in gum. And then signaling is the last one, and that's when interactions are meant to communicate an intention to other people or to ourselves. So I'm going to go really quick through this and then I'll show you some examples. So observational research, it's the last sort of tenet of our methodology. So it's how we observe and participate in the human experience. Ethnographic examples of it are interviewing, immersion, and fly on the wall. And so that's where students bring potential users in, they interview them, they talk about it, they can send out broader interviewing techniques where they're finding out what people's general ideas are. There's this fly on the wall observation, which is we literally become people watchers, right, with a specific purpose. We've got a great student union with lots of little nooks and crannies that students can sit in. And then walk a mile, again, go through the process. Participatory are things like journaling, what's on your radar, buying a feature, and it's almost a game theory. So they sit down and you're working on it together. It's no longer the designer is the person who's administrating something. The designer is someone who's working on it with them. And that's what's on your radar, building your own, buying a feature, journaling. And then last is evaluative, and that's where we do heuristic evaluations of things. We do usability testing, and we do something called A/B testing. And so what you're seeing here is usability testing, heuristic review. So we come in and we look at how complex certain parts are. We do a lot of exit interviews. And then last, this is sort of where this idea of participatory design and participatory design research has led us. I mentioned that our students are working for the Islands of Brilliance, where we're working with kids that have autism. So this is actually at a school outside Milwaukee in Greenfield. And we're working with the moderate to severe students. Many of them are nonverbal. There's something called a PECS system, which is a picture equivalency system for communication. And the reason we got involved was a teacher contacted us and said they had a problem where a student had worked, they only used these symbols, and they had pressed that symbol for bathroom, and the aide said, you can go to the bathroom in 5 minutes. There was an accident because the student had no way to really get across this idea of urgency. So how do you deal with urgency? And so our students were actually doing what designers do best, is they were coming up with visual systems, and they're working with the students themselves to see what's working and what's not working. And they went through that process with several different students. They had lots of really interesting pieces. And then the end result was a digital piece that allowed students to kind of play with that idea of what is urgent and what isn't urgent, how they used colors. We used the Mr. Yuck system, right? So you can see a little bit more there. And then this is how we actually displayed it to the community. We worked with the Urban Ecology Center, which is again in Milwaukee. Its mission is to kind of create these urban oases within Milwaukee that are accessible for everyone, right? Because certain areas have no problems accessing nature, but in the middle of the city we do. And so they provide a lot of education for students there. And we worked on their signage and their educational materials. So students went ahead and they started to create these sort of toys and games, and they built those out. We have our students go in and brand neighborhoods. We have a lot of economically disadvantaged neighborhoods in Milwaukee that get very little attention, and so we send our students into those neighborhoods. They do branding projects, they'll work with community organizations, and what you're actually looking at here is this is students that are working with, I think, the Big Brothers and Big Sisters, and they're going out, they're picking up garbage with them, they're making things, they're sort of creating these little wayfinding pieces for unused parts of the city. Again, we bring the students and we bring kids within our classroom whenever possible. We work with the community, we work with the local schools to have them come in and be part of that process. And then going back to that idea, this is Shay, and this is kind of where this whole process started. And it was, a little girl wants a hand, can anyone help her? And we said, we don't know how, but we'll figure it out. And we brought that to our classroom. And again, Karuna, Bella, and then this is students. The students came in. Again, we had no clue what we were doing. We had never even taught a class that was 3D printing at that point. And my colleague and I, Frankie Flood, we had just gotten a request and we said, let's see what the students can do with it. And the students really turned this into something pretty incredible. And they picked up their own problems. So they talked about the idea of bringing fingernails in, or to create something that's beautiful and fun. There is something called printing in place in 3D printing, and we had students that took that idea of how do you make this so that it's easy for people to print it in one go and not have to do a lot of application at the end. Again, playing with different things, playing different models. Okay. So final thoughts. So how does our design curriculum and our students benefit from participatory research? And going back, it did. It offered increased student and faculty responsibility in learning, and it required prototyping and iteration. It created a collective workspace that facilitates discussion, brainstorming, prototyping, and iteration. It connects designers with diverse users, and diverse users with diverse needs, right? Which was another really important thing. Designers get a tendency to always sort of work for who they imagine their users to be, and it's always based on themselves, right? They see all design work is going out to really hip 20-year-olds that have ridiculous amounts of money and not necessarily anything beyond that. And then it's broadened and equalized our classroom dialogue. So our results is right now, with our funding, we've generated 4 workspaces in classrooms that we feel like some are for specifically prototyping, some are for this sort of brainstorming activity. We've done 37 community projects at this point. We have 42 student volunteers at the Islands of Brilliance alone. We have a program that we call Design Milwaukee, where again, local entrepreneurs, local businesses come in that don't have access to design, and we give our designers the chance to work with them. And then we've developed several complementary majors. We have students that are now working in digital fabrication design as a major. We have design and visual communication, and we have design studies. I'm on my last slide, so I'm almost right on time. So areas of future inquiry for us is teacher and student roles. Like I said, it's become a feedback loop for us, which is a wonderful process, but it's also something that we have to realize how to manage and how to capture. Again, continuing to build these learning spaces, and what are the learning spaces of tomorrow. I'm giving another talk, and where we're actually bridging right now is in VR, virtual reality and augmented reality, and we're using VR as a development tool. So rather than them prototyping in a computer program, they're actually prototyping with VR. Ownership and dissemination of knowledge, that's a really important thing for designers. Designers and companies keep everything, right? And we're asking our designers to do things for good, for social good, out in the community, and that means that information gets disseminated. And so we talk about ownership and dissemination, and sometimes that's a problem with the university. Student impact. So far, we think we're making a positive impact on our student. We're creating better future citizens, and then community impact. And I think community impact has been really important because I think Milwaukee has benefited a lot from our design students. So that's it. Thank you.